Fleeing a violent past with her young son, Penelope finds unexpected refuge in Julian, a millionaire whose kindness sparks hope, but danger still lurks. Amid trust, betrayal, and a fragile sanctuary, will love prevail? Before we dive in, share where you're listening from and rate this emotional journey from 0-10 at the end. The night was a beast, ravenous and unyielding, its breath a torrent of rain that clawed at Penelope's skin. Each drop stung like a shard of ice, slicing through her thin jacket, soaking her golden hair until it clung to her face in heavy, dripping strands. Her lungs burned, each breath a jagged gasp as she stumbled through the forest, the earth beneath her boots a treacherous mire of mud and roots. In her arms, Theo, her 3-year-old son, trembled, his blonde curls plastered to his pale forehead, his tiny body wrapped in a sodden blanket that offered little warmth. His soft whimpers pierced her heart, sharper than the storm's assault, urging her forward through the suffocating darkness. "Penelope!" the voice roared behind her, a thunderclap of rage that drowned even the howl of the wind. Victor, her husband, was closing in, his heavy footsteps crashing through the underbrush, snapping branches like bones. "You're mine, you'll never escape!" His words were a venomous promise, each syllable laced with the cruelty she'd endured for years. His fists, his sneers, the suffocating control that had stripped her life to shadows. She didn't dare look back. To see his face, eyes wild with fury, veins bulging, hands ready to crush, would paralyze her. And she couldn't stop. Not with Theo in her arms, his small frame shaking, his breath a fragile thread against her chest. The forest was a labyrinth of gnarled trees and slick moss, their skeletal branches clawing at her as she ran. Her boots sank into the mud, each step a battle to wrench free, her legs screaming with exhaustion. But fear was a relentless driver, its icy grip tighter than the cold that numbed her fingers. She clutched Theo closer, as if her embrace could shield him from the world, from the monster who pursued them. "Just a little more, my love," she whispered, her voice hoarse, barely audible over the rain's relentless drum. "Mommy will get us out." Weeks ago, in a stolen moment of hope, she'd found it. A fleeting glimpse of salvation on a flickering computer screen in a library far from Victor's watchful eyes. The Hawthorne Estate, a sprawling plantation owned by a reclusive millionaire named Julian. Its name had glowed like a beacon on a rural property listing, a place remote enough to vanish into, a sanctuary where Victor's fists could never reach. She'd memorized its location, the winding roads, the promise of iron gates. Now, it was her only compass, guiding her through the storm's chaos. Though she had no map, no certainty, only desperation. The ground sloped downward, the forest thinning as the trees parted to reveal a valley shrouded in mist. Her heart surged with a flicker of hope. Beyond this, somewhere, lay the estate. But the terrain grew treacherous, the mud slicker, her boots heavier with each step. Theo's blanket dragged, sodden and useless, and she shifted his weight, her arms aching. His blue eyes, half closed, flickered with fear, his small hands clutching her jacket. "Mommy," he murmured, voice faint, and the sound tore at her soul. She pressed her lips to his forehead, tasting rain and salt. "We're almost there," she lied, praying it wasn't a lie. Victor's voice erupted again, closer now, a guttural snarl that sent a jolt of terror through her. "Penelope, you can't hide." The words were a blade, cutting through her resolve, and for a moment, her steps faltered. She imagined his silhouette, tall, broad, a shadow of menace, gaining ground, his boots pounding the earth, his hands itching to seize her. The memory of his last outburst flashed, a shattered glass, her cheek stinging, Theo's cries echoing as she shielded him. She shook the image away, forcing her legs to move, her breath a ragged prayer. The forest floor dipped sharply, and she nearly fell, catching herself against a tree, its bark rough under her palm. The rain blinded her, blurring the world into a smear of gray and green. But she sensed the valley opening before her. Somewhere beyond, the estate waited. If she could just reach it. Her chest heaved, her vision swam, but Theo's weight anchored her, his soft breaths a reminder of why she ran. She adjusted her grip, his small body cold against her, and pushed forward, the mud sucking at her like a living thing. A branch snapped behind her, too close, and her heart lurched. Victor was gaining, his presence a looming specter, his rage a storm within the storm. She could almost feel his breath, hot and heavy, on her neck. The forest seemed to conspire against her, its roots tripping her, its shadows hiding him. But she couldn't stop, couldn't surrender, not to him, not ever again. Theo needed her, and she would claw through hell itself to keep him safe. The air grew heavier, the rain a relentless curtain, and she stumbled again, her knee striking a rock. Pain flared, but she bit back a cry, clutching Theo tighter. "I'm here, baby," she whispered, more to herself than to him. The valley was near. She could feel it, a shift in the air, a faint promise of open land. The Hawthorne estate was her lighthouse, its name a mantra in her mind. She didn't know Julian, didn't know if he'd help, but it was her only chance, her only hope in a world that had offered her none. Victor's voice roared again, a beast unchained, and she knew he was mere steps away. "Penelope!" The sound was a lash, stripping away the last of her strength. But she summoned one final burst, her legs churning through the mud, her heart a drumbeat of defiance. The forest was her battleground, the storm her witness, and Theo her reason. She would reach the estate, or she would die trying. The night swallowed her cries, but it could not swallow her will. Penelope's legs churned through the mud, her breath a ragged prayer as she broke free from the forest's clawing embrace. The valley opened before her, a shadowed expanse where the rain fell in relentless sheets, blurring the world into a haze of gray. Theo clung to her chest, his small body trembling, his blonde curls sodden against her jacket. Victor's roars echoed behind, closer now, each shout a lash that drove her forward. The promise of the Hawthorne estate burned in her mind, its iron gates a distant beacon she could almost see through the storm's fury. But as the ground leveled, a new terror loomed. A vast lake, its black waters churning like a living void, blocking her path to salvation. The lake stretched wide, its surface a shattered mirror of rain and lightning, edged by jagged rocks and skeletal pines. On its far shore, the estate's gates glinted faintly, a cruel tease of safety. Penelope's heart sank, her boots skidding on the slick bank as she realized there was no time to circle. Victor's footsteps pounded nearer, his voice a guttural snarl. "Penelope, you're done!" The words were a blade, slicing through her resolve, and she clutched Theo tighter, his whimpers barely audible over the storm's howl. His small hands gripped her, cold and fragile, and she pressed her lips to his forehead, whispering, "We'll make it, my love." But doubt gnawed at her. There was no path, no bridge, only the water's icy maw. She staggered to the lake's edge, her boots slipping on wet stones, the mud sucking at her like a predator. The gates were so close, yet impossibly far, and Victor's presence loomed, a shadow of rage breaking through the trees. His silhouette emerged, tall and menacing, his shirt torn, eyes blazing with feral hunger. "Give me my son," he bellowed, lunging forward, his fists clenched like hammers. Penelope's breath caught, her body instinctively twisting to shield Theo. She took a step back, her foot finding only air, and panic surged as she stumbled, the lake's edge crumbling beneath her. Time slowed, her scream swallowed by the wind, and then she was falling, Theo slipping from her arms as the water claimed them both. The lake was a shock of blades, its cold piercing her skin, flooding her ears, her mouth, her eyes. Darkness enveloped her, the weight of the water dragging her down, and for a moment, terror overwhelmed her. Theo was gone. Her hands flailed blindly, fingers brushing the sodden blanket, and desperation clawed through her fear. She dove deeper, the murky depths a suffocating void, until her hand closed around Theo's small form. She pulled him close, kicking upward, her lungs burning as she broke the surface, gasping. Theo's head lolled against her, his eyes half open, his breath faint. "Stay with me," she choked, flailing to keep them afloat, her arms trembling under his weight. The rain blinded her, the waves relentless, and she screamed, "Help!" a raw, desperate plea that tore from her soul. On the shore, Victor stood frozen, his chest heaving, his eyes glinting with a mix of rage and indecision. For a moment, she thought he might dive in, but then he turned, his form swallowed by the trees, abandoning her to the lake's mercy. Her strength waned, the cold numbing her limbs, Theo's weight pulling her under. She fought to keep his face above the water, her own head dipping beneath the surface, her vision blurring. "Please," she whispered. To no one, to anyone as the lake tightened its grip. Across the estate, Julian Hawthorne paused in the stables, his blonde hair damp under a leather hat, his hands tightening on a coil of rope. The storm's din was a constant roar, but a faint cry cut through it. Sharp, human, desperate. His blue eyes narrowed, heart racing as he dropped the rope and sprinted toward the lake, his boots pounding the muddy path. Branches lashed his face, but he ignored them, the cry echoing again, weaker now, a woman's voice pleading for salvation. He burst through the fog, the lake unfolding before him, and saw her, a figure struggling in the water, her blonde hair fanning out, a small child held aloft in her trembling arms. Julian didn't hesitate. He tore off his coat, the heavy fabric hitting the ground, and dove into the lake, the cold a brutal shock that stole his breath. His body screamed against it, but he swam with powerful strokes, cutting through the waves. The woman was sinking, her movement sluggish, the child's head barely above the surface. "Hold on!" he shouted, his voice a beacon in the chaos. He reached her as her arms faltered, wrapping one around her waist, the other securing the child against his chest. She was limp, her strength spent, but her grip on the boy never wavered. Julian kicked hard, dragging them toward the shore, the lake fighting him every inch of the way. He stumbled onto the bank, collapsing to his knees, gasping for air. The woman coughed, her body shaking violently, her blonde hair plastered to her face. The child, a boy with curls mirroring hers, was pale, his breathing shallow but steady. Julian's hands moved swiftly, checking the boy's pulse, then hers. "You're safe," he said, his voice low but firm, though his own heart pounded like a drum. He lifted the boy gently, then helped her to her feet, her legs unsteady. The estate's lights glowed through the rain, a promise of warmth, and he guided them toward it, his arm steadying her. The storm raged on, but for now, the lake had lost its prey, and Julian knew, as he looked at the woman's haunted eyes, that their story was only beginning. Penelope's body trembled as Julian guided her through the grand oak doors of the Hawthorne estate. The warmth of the foyer, a stark contrast to the lake's icy grip. Her blonde hair clung to her face, dripping onto the polished floor, and Theo, cradled in her arms, stirred faintly, his small chest rising with shallow breaths. The storm's roar faded behind the thick walls, replaced by the crackle of a fire in a massive hearth, its golden light casting shadows across tapestried walls. Julian's presence was a steady anchor, his hand gentle on her elbow as he led her to a plush velvet sofa. He draped a thick wool blanket over her shoulders, its weight a comfort, and knelt to wrap Theo in another, his movements careful, almost reverent. "You're safe now," Julian said, his blue eyes meeting hers with a quiet intensity that cut through her fog of fear. His blonde hair, still damp, fell across his forehead, and his voice carried a calm that belied the urgency of moments ago. Penelope nodded, unable to speak, her throat raw from screaming. Theo's curls were matted, his face pale, but his breathing steadied, and she pressed him closer, feeling his heartbeat against her own. Julian rose, stoking the fire until it roared, then disappeared briefly, returning with a tray of steaming chamomile tea and a warm cloth. He handed her the cloth, and she wiped Theo's face, her hands shaking as the cold began to ebb from her bones. The room was a haven, its high ceilings adorned with carved beams, shelves lined with leather-bound books, and a faint scent of cedar lingering in the air. But Penelope's mind churned, replaying Victor's silhouette on the lake's shore, his retreat into the trees. He was out there, waiting, his rage a coiled snake ready to strike. She shivered, not from cold, but from the certainty that safety was fleeting. Julian sat across from her, offering a mug of tea, its warmth seeping into her palms. "What happened out there?" he asked, his tone soft but probing, inviting her to unburden without demand. Her lips parted, but words caught like thorns. She stared into the fire, its flames dancing like the memories she'd buried. "His name is Victor," she began, her voice a fragile thread. "My husband. He wasn't always like this, or maybe I didn't see it. At first he was charming, protective, but then came the shouting, the control, a wrong word, a late dinner, and his hands would—" She faltered, touching her cheek where bruises had once bloomed. "When Theo was born, I thought he'd soften, but he claimed him. Said Theo was his property. He'd lock us in, threatened to take him if I left." Tears welled, and she wiped them away, glancing at Theo, now asleep in her lap. "Tonight I ran. I found your estate online, a place to hide. I didn't know if you'd help, but it was all I had." Julian listened, his jaw tightening, a flicker of anger in his eyes. Not at her, but at the man who'd driven her to this. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and said, "No one will hurt you here, not while I'm breathing." His words were a vow, simple yet ironclad, and for the first time in years, Penelope felt a spark of trust, fragile but real. She nodded, clutching the mug, its warmth a lifeline. Julian stood, fetching a dry shirt for himself, his soaked clothes clinging to his broad frame. He moved with purpose, checking Theo's pulse again, ensuring the boy's color was returning. The peace was shattered by the sharp click of heels on the hardwood floor. A woman swept into the room, her presence like a cold wind snuffing out the fire's warmth. Celeste, Julian's estranged wife, stood in the doorway, her auburn hair swept into a severe bun, her emerald eyes narrowing as they landed on Penelope and Theo. The blanket around Theo, a soft weave of cream and blue, caught her gaze, and her lips tightened. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice sharp as a blade. "Who are these people, Julian, and why are they wrapped in my blanket?" The accusation hung heavy, her tone dripping with disdain, as if Penelope were an intruder sullying her domain. Julian rose, his calm unshaken, but his eyes hardened. "Celeste, this is Penelope and her son, Theo. I pulled them from the lake. They were fleeing danger." His words were measured, but Celeste's gaze flicked to Penelope, scanning her drenched clothes, her pale face, and Theo's small form. "Fleeing danger?" she scoffed, crossing her arms. "Another damsel with a sob story? You're too soft, Julian. They'll bleed you dry." The venom in her voice stung, and Penelope's grip on Theo tightened, her heart pounding. She wanted to speak, to defend herself, but exhaustion and fear silenced her. "Enough," Julian said, his voice low but cutting. "They need shelter, and I'm giving it. This isn't up for debate. Celeste's eyes flashed, a storm brewing behind them. But she said nothing, her heels clicking as she turned and vanished down the hall. The air grew heavy, the fire's crackle the only sound. Penelope's stomach twisted. Celeste's contempt was a new threat, one she hadn't anticipated. Julian sat beside her, his presence steadying. "She's not always here," he said quietly. "Don't let her words take root." But Penelope saw the glint in Celeste's eyes, a promise of trouble, and knew this refuge, however warm, was not yet a sanctuary. Outside, the storm raged on, and somewhere, Victor waited, his shadow looming over the fragile hope she clung to. The Hawthorne estate exhaled a tentative peace in the days following the storm, its sprawling fields and sun-dappled orchards weaving a fragile cocoon around Penelope and Theo. The morning air carried the scent of dew-kissed grass as Penelope, her blonde hair catching the light, knelt beside Theo in the henhouse, his small hands clumsily gathering eggs. His giggles, bright and unburdened, were a balm to her soul, soothing the raw edges of fear that still lingered from Victor's pursuit. Julian joined them, his blonde hair tousled, his blue eyes crinkling as he showed Theo how to scatter grain for the chickens, their laughter mingling like a melody. Each shared moment. Julian, lifting Theo to pet a horse, or Penelope's shy smile as he handed her a mug of chamomile tea, wove a thread of trust, delicate but growing stronger. Yet, beneath the estate's warmth, a shadow festered. Celeste's presence, though sporadic, was a splinter under the skin. Her sharp glances and curt words hung like frost in the air, her disdain for Penelope and Theo palpable. Penelope felt it keenly, her heart tightening each time Celeste's heels clicked past, her emerald eyes glinting with something darker than mere contempt. Julian's assurances, "She's rarely here, don't mind her," did little to quell the unease gnawing at Penelope. She sensed Celeste watching, waiting, a predator circling a prey she hadn't yet named. The tension snapped one gray dawn when the crunch of tires on gravel heralded an unexpected arrival. Penelope, cradling Theo in the nursery, froze as heavy boots thudded on the porch. Julian, drying his hands on a dish towel in the kitchen, opened the door to two police officers, their badges gleaming under the overcast sky. The taller one, a man with a square jaw, spoke first. "We received a tip about a theft. A sapphire bracelet, valuable, reportedly stolen from this residence. The suspect named is Penelope Reed." His words landed like a blow, and Penelope, emerging into the hallway with Theo in her arms, felt her breath catch. Her blonde hair fell loosely over her shoulders, her face paling as the accusation sank in. "Theo's mother? A thief!" Julian's voice was steady, but his eyes blazed with disbelief. "That's absurd. She's our guest, fleeing a dangerous man. She'd never—" The female officer cut him off, her expression impassive. "We have a warrant to search her room, specifically the nursery." Penelope's heart raced, her grip on Theo tightening as she followed them, her mind spiraling. She'd touched nothing, taken nothing, yet the certainty in the officer's eyes chilled her. Celeste stood at the edge of the room, her lips curled in a faint, venomous smile, her presence a silent gloat. The officers moved methodically, rifling through drawers, checking under the bed, their hands probing the nursery's quiet corners. The male officer knelt by Theo's crib, his fingers slipping beneath the mattress, and froze. "Got something," he said, pulling out a delicate sapphire bracelet, its gems winking accusingly in the dim light. Penelope's gasp echoed, her voice trembling as she stammered, "That's not mine. I've never seen it." Theo whimpered, sensing her distress, and she clutched him closer, her eyes darting to Julian, pleading for belief. The officers exchanged glances, the woman's voice cool. You're saying this was planted? Of course it was, Penelope's shout cracked with desperation. I'd never steal. Not with my son here, not after everything. Her mind raced to Victor, but his cruelty was blunt, not cunning. This was different, calculated, personal. Her gaze flicked to Celeste, whose smile flickered, a predator caught in a trap. Julian's face hardened, a flash of realization crossing his features. Wait here, he said, his voice ablade, and strode from the room, leaving Penelope with the officers, her heart pounding like a war drum. In his study, Julian dropped the dish towel and powered on the nursery's baby monitor, a precaution he'd installed on Penelope's first night, its camera hidden in a corner shelf. He rewound the footage, the seconds ticking like a countdown. The screen flickered, revealing the nursery at 3:17 a.m., the door creaking open. Celeste slipped inside, her silk robe gliding like a specter, her movements precise. She opened a drawer, pulled the bracelet from her sleeve, and slid it under Theo's mattress, her voice a low hiss. Let's see if Julian's savior complex survives a thief. The footage ended, and Julian's fists clenched, rage and betrayal warring in his chest. Celeste had crossed a line, one he hadn't known she was capable of. He stormed back to the nursery, his voice cutting through the tension. Officers, you need to see this. He led them to the study, replaying the footage. Celeste's guilt laid bare. The female officer's lips tightened, and the man shook his head. This changes everything, he said. The tip was fabricated. Mrs. Reed is innocent. Penelope's knees buckled, relief flooding her, though fear lingered. Celeste's malice was a wound that wouldn't close. The officers turned to Celeste, who stood frozen, her mask slipping. You recorded me? She spat, her voice venomous. Julian stepped closer, his eyes burning. You betrayed us all. Leave now. Celeste's laugh was brittle, her heels clicking as she fled, her parting glare a promise of retribution. This isn't over, she hissed, the door slamming behind her. Penelope sank onto the sofa, Theo in her lap, her hands trembling. Julian knelt beside her, his hand on her shoulder, his touch a lifeline. She's gone, he said, but Penelope saw the storm in his eyes, mirroring her own. Celeste's departure was no end, but a beginning, a spark that could ignite a fire. Outside, the clouds thickened, and Penelope knew, as she held Theo's small hand, that their refuge was a battlefield, its peace as fragile as the dawn. The Hawthorne estate settled into an uneasy calm after Celeste's expulsion, its golden fields and whispering orchards cloaking Penelope and Theo in a fragile embrace. The nursery camera's revelation had banished one threat, but its echo lingered, a chill that seeped into Penelope's bones despite the sun's warmth. She moved through the days with cautious hope, her blonde hair catching the light as she taught Theo to plant basil seedlings, his small fingers patting the soil with glee. Julian was a constant presence, his blue eyes softening as he hoisted Theo onto his shoulders, or shared quiet smiles with Penelope over morning tea. Yet, beneath their growing bond, a shadow stirred. Celeste's parting vow of retribution hung like a storm cloud, and Penelope's dreams were haunted by Victor's unseen menace. In a city bar, where neon flickered and the air reeked of stale beer, Celeste found her ally. The Blackthorn Saloon was a dive frozen in time, its patrons hunched over scarred tables, drowning ghosts in cheap liquor. Celeste, her auburn hair loose, her emerald eyes glinting with malice, sipped gin at the counter, her leather jacket a stark contrast to the bar's grime. Her gaze, locked on a man in the corner, slumped in a torn chair, his broad frame hunched over a warm beer. Victor, his face shadowed by a scruffy beard, exuded a restless fury, his hands calloused from years of violence. An old drunk clapped his shoulder, slurring, "Victor, drinking to forget that wife of yours?" The name was a spark, igniting Celeste's interest. She approached, her heels clicking, her smile a calculated mask. "Victor, is it?" she purred, sliding into a chair. "You know a Penelope?" His head snapped up, eyes narrowing, a trap springing shut. "What's it to you?" he growled, voice low, dangerous. Celeste leaned closer, her phone glowing with a photo of Penelope and Theo on the estate's porch, Julian's arm around them. "She's living my life," she said, voice venomous, "with my husband. And yours." Victor's fingers tightened around the bottle, knuckles white, a guttural sound escaping his throat. "He took my family," he spat, eyes burning. Celeste's lips curled. "And he discarded me. Let's burn their world down." Their pact was forged in whispers, a blueprint of vengeance. At dawn, they'd infiltrate the estate. Victor would torch the barn, erasing Julian's legacy in flames, while Celeste planted drugs in Penelope's room, framing her for a scandal that would rip Theo away. "Cocaine in her drawers," Celeste murmured, "an anonymous tip, and social services will take the boy." Victor's smile was twisted, hungry. "She'll beg me to take her back." They shook hands, a deal sealed in hate, their shadows merging as they planned to shatter the fragile haven Penelope had found. The estate slept under a moonless sky, its silence a deceptive shroud. Julian, wary since Celeste's betrayal, had fortified the grounds, motion sensors, spotlights, a silent alarm wired to the local precinct. Penelope, unaware of the looming threat, tucked Theo into bed, his curls fanning across the pillow, his soft snores a fragile peace. She lingered, her hand on his chest, the nursery camera's red light a quiet sentinel. Downstairs, Julian checked the locks, his jaw tight, sensing the air's unease. The night felt alive, its stillness a predator holding its breath. At 4:37 a.m., two figures crept through the estate's perimeter. Victor, in a grimy black jacket, clutched a gasoline canister, its cloth wick soaked and ready. Celeste, gloved, her backpack heavy with pills and powder, moved with surgical precision, her dark glasses glinting despite the darkness. They cut the electric fence's wire, slipping through twisted branches toward their targets. "Barn's there," Victor whispered, nodding toward the looming structure. "You hit the house," Celeste replied, her voice cold. "Second room left upstairs. Master key if it's locked." They split, shadows dissolving into the night. Victor eased open the barn side door, the scent of hay and horses thick in his nose. He splashed gasoline over beams and bales, the liquid glugging like a heartbeat. Celeste climbed the house's back porch, prying open a window, her red flashlight slicing the darkness. She glided to Penelope's room, finding the wardrobe's false bottom, a perfect hiding spot. She planted cocaine packets and pill strips, her movements swift, clinical. But as she turned to leave, the night erupted. Spotlights blazed, flooding the estate in harsh white light, and a piercing alarm shattered the silence, Julian's safeguards springing to life. Victor froze in the barn, match in hand, as patrol cars roared from the forest road, their lights cutting through the pre-dawn gloom. "Get down!" an officer shouted, guns drawn, doors shielding them. Victor bolted, slipping on wet hay, but was tackled, cuffs snapping tight. Celeste, fleeing the house, stumbled in the mud, her backpack spilling pills, syringes, and cocaine scattering like confetti. An officer pinned her, her screams swallowed by the dawn. "You can't do this!" she shrieked, but the evidence lay bare, her plan in ruins. Penelope awoke to the chaos, heart pounding, Theo stirring beside her. She rushed to the window, seeing flashing lights, officers swarming. Julian appeared, his arm around her, his voice steady. "They came for us, but they're caught. It's over." She clung to Theo, tears welling, relief warring with dread. Victor and Celeste were gone, their vengeance thwarted, but the cost was a stark reminder. Safety was hard won. As dawn broke, painting the sky in soft pinks, Penelope felt Julian's hand in hers, their bond a quiet fortress against the shadows that had tried to tear them apart. The dawn that followed the thwarted invasion of the Hawthorne estate painted the sky in hues of rose and gold, as if the world itself exhaled in relief. Penelope stood on the porch. Theo nestled in her arms, his blonde curls catching the light as he watched the last police car vanish down the gravel road. The air was crisp, scented with wet earth and the faint sweetness of blooming lavender, but her heart still raced, the echo of alarms and Celeste's venomous screams lingering like a bruise. Julian's hand rested on her shoulder, his blue eyes steady, a silent promise that the shadows of Victor and Celeste were locked away, their plans reduced to ash. Yet as Penelope met his gaze, she felt a shift, a spark of something deeper, a fragile hope taking root in the wreckage of fear. The estate blossomed into a sanctuary in the weeks that followed, its rhythms a balm to Penelope's soul. Mornings found her and Theo in the garden, his small hands plunging into soil as Julian taught him to plant mint, their laughter a melody that drowned out the past. Penelope's blonde hair glowed in the sunlight, her smiles less guarded, her movements lighter as she gathered eggs or hung laundry, the dew-kissed grass cool under her bare feet. Julian was ever present, his quiet strength a tether, whether carving wooden toys for Theo or leaving chamomile tea with a handwritten note. The world is brighter with you here. Each gesture wove their lives closer, a tapestry of trust and unspoken affection. One evening, as summer's warmth settled over the estate, Julian proposed an outdoor dinner under the ancient oak that stood sentinel over the fields. "Just us," he said, his voice soft, eyes crinkling as Theo clapped in delight. Penelope felt a flutter in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the season. The meadow was transformed by dusk, the oak's branches strung with lanterns that flickered like fireflies, casting a golden glow over a low wooden table. Rustic plates held fresh salads, cherry tomatoes, and herb-crusted chicken, the air rich with the scent of homemade bread and red wine from a local vineyard. Theo, in light overalls, toddled about, chasing the first stars, while Penelope, in a pastel floral dress, her hair in soft waves, felt Julian's gaze like a touch. They sat, the table a small universe of their own, Theo's giggles punctuating the cricket's song. Julian raised a glass, his voice warm. "To new beginnings," he said, and Penelope's heart skipped as their glasses clinked, Theo mimicking with his juice. The meal unfolded in laughter, Theo smearing sauce on his cheeks, Julian's playful stories of boyhood misadventures. As the night deepened, Theo curled up on a blanket, his breathing soft, and the lantern's light danced in Julian's eyes. He reached for Penelope's hand, his touch electric, sparking a heat that flushed her cheeks. "Penelope," he said, voice low, "you and Theo brought my heart back from a place I thought was lost." She held her breath, the world narrowing to his gaze, the lantern's glow a halo around them. He stood, drawing her to her feet, and the space between them vanished. Their kiss was slow, deliberate, a fusion of tenderness and desire that unraveled years of her guarded heart. His lips were firm, yet soft, tasting of wine and promise, and she melted into him, her fingers tracing the strength of his shoulders. Time paused, the cricket's song fading, leaving only the rhythm of their breaths. When they parted, his eyes held hers, a silent vow, and he knelt, his hand still clasping hers. "Will you marry me?" he asked, voice trembling with conviction. Tears spilled down her cheeks, joy and fear colliding. But her answer came like a prayer. Yes. The word was a release, a leap into a future she'd never dared dream. Julian's smile was radiant, and he kissed her again, sealing their bond under the oak's ancient witness. The wedding followed weeks later, a simple yet enchanted affair beneath the same tree, its branches adorned with white ribbons and wildflowers. Penelope, in a cream lace dress, glowed as she walked to Julian, Theo in navy suspenders, toddling beside her, clutching lavender sprigs. Their vows were a melody of promises. Julian's voice, steady, as he pledged to love and protect. Penelope's trembling with gratitude for the man who'd taught her to trust again. Theo's laughter, as he hugged them, drew tears from the small gathering of neighbors and friends. Months later, as autumn's first chill kissed the estate, Penelope called Julian to the porch, her hands resting on her belly, eyes shining. "You're going to be a father," she said, and his face lit with wonder, laughter, and tears mingling as he lifted her, spinning her gently. Theo, now a proud big brother, clapped at the news, his curls bouncing. When Lila was born, under a soft spring rain, Julian cradled her tiny form, his voice breaking. "My daughter, I've waited for you." Penelope, exhausted but radiant, watched from the hospital bed, her heart full as Theo peeked at his sister, awestruck. Back at the estate, life wove a new rhythm. Evenings found them on the porch, Lila sleeping in Penelope's arms, Theo playing with wooden horses, the sunset painting the sky in burnt orange and lilac. Julian's arm encircled her, his voice soft. "I thought happiness was a story for others," he said. "But you, Theo, Lila, you're my everything." Penelope leaned into him, the past's ghosts silenced, their love a fortress. The estate thrived, its fields alive with promise. And as crickets sang, Penelope knew they'd built not just a home, but an eternal bloom, rooted deep, unyielding to any storm. Thank you for joining us in the heartfelt journey of A Mother's Haven. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your name, where you're listening from, and how this story of love and resilience touched you. Drop a score from 0 to 10 to let us know what you think. Your support means the world, so please like and subscribe for more tales that stir the soul. Until next time, stay inspired and we'll meet again soon.